3, 2, 1, and action.
Welcome to the second Truth Bowl. This week we're trying a new format. I hope you like it. Instead of ranking and rating the presenters, the focus is on ideas. Throughout this discussion, what we're asking you to do is let us know what you think are the most stimulating and best ideas, and we'll have a chance to do questions and answers and develop those. The format is that the first presenter has 5 to 7 minutes to present ideas relating to, if you had one thing you could do to change the educational system, what would it be? That's our topic this week. So we're going to start with Dr. Ernie Probacher. Did I say that right, Ernie? Did I get it close enough?
Yes.
Okay. And also with David Gleason. This week, Ernie will go first and then David. After the presentation, I will, as the moderator, reflect back what I heard so that you can hear through my lens what I heard, and then I will ask for clarifications. This is strictly me reflecting, active listening, so that you know that what you can hear it in two voices, the original presenter and a greatly summarized version from me. I am Dr. Chris Hahn. I'm a professional facilitator and mediator. With that, I think let's get going. Are you prepared to go, Ernie?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe just, I'll introduce myself when I get started. My name is Dr. Ernie Probacher. I have a PhD in physics from Caltech. I spent 22 years of my life in education and escaped, and have been pondering what I did and didn't learn from all of that. And as part of that journey, I've been working with this team to create Truth Bowl. I'm excited to try this version of it. So the question of how to fix education, let's start with defining what we mean by fixing education. So from my perspective, education, and I think this applies more broadly, but I think it's particularly acute in the United States, education is broken. By which I mean investments in education overall are not dramatically improving society or individuals. Now, I caveat that by saying certain kinds of education work really well for certain groups of people. And at an individual level, as a sorting mechanism, education is very effective in making sure that within a given discipline, the smartest and most committed people rise to the top. And I want to acknowledge that that is a useful purpose of education, and that was the original purpose of elite education. When you're drawing from a small homogeneous population of generally the wealthy elite, you want to make sure that the smartest and most hardworking portions of those are the people who get the jobs as judges and and theologians and various cultural elites. But from my perspective, what happened was that worked so well that in the 50s we thought, well, gee, a lot more people should go to education, so we get these kind of highly curated and knowledgeable and passionate people. But then this became what I would call the idolization of college, where the idea is that the goal is to get people into college. And it wasn't even clear why or what that meant. And with the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, that meant you could go and party and live a wild cultural lifestyle. And that was considered still going to college. So for some reason, it kind of bifurcated into two different strands. One is the college as just at the extreme end, as a party school. You go there, you put in your time as a college, you get a degree, you spend most of your time goofing off and being a wild young adult, and you're really just adulting and getting away from things. And the actual learning is relatively minor, but it could still distinguish you from a high school graduate and open doors for you as a job. And the other extreme is what I would call the neurotic upper class problem, which is where your parents, let's call it the Asian parent problem, right? You must go to Harvard because that's how you make your family proud of you. And those people are not partying, they're going insanely hard at working at these things to try and get their degree or get into the right school, et cetera. The problem is neither of those things is actually correlated with learning. And so for people in the middle, college can still work very well. If you're on the margins of a lower income group, going into college can help you break into the middle class or the upper class. But increasingly for people on either end who are seeing college just as a rite of passage without a lot of value, or people who are killing themselves, sometimes literally, to try and prove themselves, college is not working very well. And we are spending more and more money on education. Education is growing faster than the rate of inflation and has for a long time. But our society is not becoming healthier. Our society is becoming more unequal rather than less. And so a lot of the promises we naively had when we started on this journey for education have not been fulfilled. Now, why is that? So I'll make the controversial statement that the problem is that the existing college system is really designed well for perpetuating the existing college system. And I mean that in a very specific sense, in that the best students are those who will make the best future professors. They're good at sitting through long, boring lectures, writing papers about stuff, grinding through meaningless work. And if you can do all that stuff, the people who can persevere in that will make good professors. And this is not by accident. The original education system was designed created in the medieval times out of the monastic system when you first started having all this ideas of knowledge and books, and you wanted to find the people who were the masters of this knowledge who could then go and teach others. So they created this sort of sorting and grading system to pick out the cream of the crop of all the people who came to study for those who would make good professors. Now, for the context in which it was used, it was not a bad idea. But when you started applying that to lower grades, you had this really horrible idea that you started grading students the way we graded meat in the industrial system, the early part of the 20th century. And what you're grading people on is how good are they at becoming the next kind of professors. And one could argue that that was a plausible thing to do, but it's become this horrible measure of self-worth and value to society, to which it is very weakly, if at all, correlated. I mean, there is some correlation there, but it's a very weak correlation. So that's the problem I want to fix, is that we have a system that was designed for a different problem that's causing horrible problems, even though it kind of works to a certain extent. So it's not enough just to criticize it, we have to suggest a better alternative. So what I would propose is that this whole concept of grading around academic disciplines, which worked well for sorting people as professors, is a horrible way to promote societal flourishing. What you really want is a system which encourages each individual to find the things that they can do to both contribute to society and find their own personal happiness. The problem is that the system is not created by any one person. It evolved more or less organically over 1,000 years. But what's interesting is every part of the system relies on the academic transcript as the tool for managing communication between the different groups. So between parents and teachers, between schools and universities, transferring between universities, they all use the transcript as the integration point. And just like in computer hardware and software, when you control the interfaces, you control the system. So there's a group called Mastery.org, which is inventing an alternative to the college transcript. It's been driven by the elite prep schools on the East Coast who wanted their students to be focusing on mastering topics rather than just passing a test and complying with an arbitrary curriculum. And they went to a bunch of universities and said, well, we don't want to look at 50 different versions of portfolio. If you can come up with one standard portfolio that demonstrates mastery that's as easy to scan as a transcript, we will accept that for college application. So they're currently 1 or 2 years into a 6-year journey to define a new open standard and open source technology platform that any educational institution can use to communicate mastery. And you can find out, some level of difficulty and rarity around this, but the student, it'll say that they have mastered this, these are the criteria, and you can actually see the work they did. So very 21st century learning objects involved in this. But the best thing about this is once you start changing that interface from a transcript, which means something only to college professors, to actually real-world mastery of skills, you no longer need college, right? If I can gain mastery in a micro degree or a credential or a skill, and I can prove that, and you already see that happening in software today. In software today, college degrees are becoming less and less valuable because you can just prove your work by working on an open source project on GitHub. Now that has issues because it is only really appealing or accessible to certain strata, but it is a viable pathway. And if we can start standardizing and platformizing the ability for students to show their work, this will allow innovators within education who are trying basic pitch is that the incentive system that we inherited for education is all wrong. It's literally killing people. And if we can create a new and better incentive system, we can come up with a learning environment, not necessarily education that's done to people, but a system for promoting learning that better serves both individuals and society.
Thanks, Ernie. Now what I will do is reflect back, and again, this is going to be a very condensed summary of what I heard. There was a lot of information downloaded right then, but we'll see if I can hit the points here. So the overall premise that we're talking about here is how to fix education. Education, the way it now exists, is effective for only a certain group. And that's the way it was originally implemented a long time ago, primarily for elite people who could afford to go to school. And the smartest and the most hard-working men were set up to get the top jobs, whether it's lawyer, judge, doctor, whatever. The top jobs went to the people who could enter and succeed in these elite systems. We want to change the goal to get, then there was a change to get more people in school. So you had a flood of people in who were just parking there, having a good time, partying. The goal was to get through the system rather than succeed in this elite meritocracy, it's a word that Ernie didn't use, that would lead to the top jobs. The point was to just get through it, have fun. That's one extreme. The other extreme is, Ernie used the term Asian parent, sort of pushing a student, their children in, they got to go to Harvard or a very elite school to make their parents be proud. So that's at the other extreme. And the idea or the point that Ernie was making is that neither constitute learning. Right now, the system is designed to perpetuate the existing college system. Graduates that are successful are perfectly suited to becoming professors and keeping the system rolling. Becoming the next professor is based on the transcript system, getting good grades, and using that as the measure of success. Ernie makes a point that grading is really a horrible system, and we need something different. The academic transcript as the integration point isn't the best system that we can come up with. Instead, Ernie proposes that mastering concepts is what we should be focusing on, and developing a system that will allow us to understand mastery rather than grades on a transcript. And he didn't mention the college, but he said an elite college is testing this mastery measuring system. They're a couple of years into about a 6-year study. So if mastery is the standard, college degrees aren't necessary. And as an example, coders, software engineers who haven't gone to college can just jump right in and demonstrate mastery in the job. They don't even need college. So what we're looking at is an improvement in the overall system to teach valuable skills in the world and develop mastery in relevant areas. And that will create a new and better incentive system. So that's the end of my summary. Ernie, you want to correct or add anything?
No, I think that's really good. I think the one thing I realized from that is that basically what we have right now is a one-dimensional meritocracy that measures merit along one fairly narrow, even if it's broad in its own way, across multi-disciplines. And what I'm really arguing for is a multi-dimensional meritocracy, where there are many more ways to demonstrate value of different kinds of skill and competency.
Excellent. Oh, nice clarification there.
All right.
Okay, David, you ready to go?
I am ready to go, Chris.
Okay, let her run.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Gleason. I am of this group. I am the only one who doesn't have a PhD, but that's okay because I have my issues with education as well. I'm going to start off briefly, partly because it's a small crowd, and give a little background. I studied Russian literature in college, and one of the points I want to make is that in my experience, I spent 2 years at a junior college, and I thought the grading system was meaningless and actually discouraging. So I went to UC Santa Cruz at a time when we only got pass-fail. I studied literature, I studied political theory, and I learned an enormous amount in the 2 years at Santa Cruz. And I'm going to give you an exhibit here, Exhibit A. This is a term paper I wrote, and it's dated June 10th, 1970. It's almost half a century ago. I still read it because I still learn from the notes that my professor made. So in response to Ernie's proposal, first of all, I think it was really well articulated, well thought out, and I think it's full of meaningful, valuable information, and I support it entirely. But I do, in the sense of this truth bowl, I do want to offer some questions and some inquiry to help dig into what it might really mean and how it comes across to other people. There's one last thing I want to say, and I don't, Chris, you're going to have to give me a time check. I didn't start a clock. I was watching the Democratic debate, the Democratic candidates for president, and somebody said something, one of the senators said something that just hit me over the head. He said, we have the largest population of incarcerated people in the world on a per capita basis. 88% of the people in prison today did not graduate from high school. So I think that says something not only about the educational structure, but also the need not simply for jobs, but simply for keeping people out of prison. And of course the underlying point is not only does it ruin their lives and the lives of victims, but it's enormously expensive for society. This is something that's terribly broken. And he was tying it directly to the educational system. So this is a big issue. This is a big problem. So to Ernie's points, I think he made a really good, strong case for the problems with education today. He's clearly documented why the system isn't working for most people. And I think if you look at those 88% who are in prison, the medieval educational systems certainly failed them. But that's not even the majority. There's far more people who just simply, it doesn't work for them. So my questions, again, when I was at UC Santa Cruz, I was in a pass-fail system, which worked very well for me because I was evaluated on my work on literally a week-by-week basis. I had one course where I wrote 10 papers over 10 weeks, and I still have those papers, and I still read them. And so one of the questions I have is, how does this meritocracy system that Ernie's talking about, how to make it a more meaningful process of building a resume or a curriculum vitae of your work throughout your educational system, it not only helps the teacher to grade a student, helps the parent to understand what the work student is doing, but also helps the student learn, which is the point I was making with my paper. Is by writing this paper, I got tremendous feedback and I learned, and I've then applied it to my career. So one of the questions I had for Ernie is how that process would work, and especially how does it work at scale? You know, we have, I don't know how many millions of kids in school and millions more who should be in school. How does that work in terms of the role of the professor, the teacher? How much of that is the state? How much of this is privatized? And one of my big concerns, again, back to the prison system, is how does this support the underclass that doesn't understand the concepts that I think we in high tech understand very clearly, which is what's a project, what's a task, how do you assign things, how do you meet a deadline, how do you understand time management. These are things that are learned early on in school, and I would love to hear Ernie respond on how this system would help with that. Another thing that, Chris, how am I doing on time?
You're doing fine.
All right. Another thing I think is really intriguing is I have a cause that I'm always harping about. These guys have heard it, Chris and Ernie have heard it before. I believe that along with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, some of the skills we need to inculcate and to encourage are what I call the 6 C's, which include communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, curiosity, and last but not least, compassion. So I'd love to hear from Ernie how his idea of transforming education would encourage not only training in technical skills, but also in these communication and collaboration skills, and things like empathy and compassion. Let me look at what else I got. Yeah, the other thing is I'd love to hear Ernie's take on the course of a student's educational career. How you start off in the primary, then move to secondary, and then high school and college. How does the person develop over the course of that entire lifespan? The other thing is that we're talking a lot now in industry about the need for lifelong learning. The educational system treats us, takes care of us, or manages us in many ways for the first 18 years. Then they hand you off to industry, and then government kind of steps in at retirement and takes over your life again, or contributes in some way. How does that translate into a lifelong process where a person's life and work are not only managed but also tracked and evaluated in a meaningful way without it becoming the state running people's lives? There was one other thing I wanted to ask. Yeah, I had lunch with a couple of friends, several friends who are all retired. One's a retired surgeon, another's a stockbroker, one guy's a theater producer, wide range of people. And I mentioned to them this idea, excuse me, let me find my notes. Yeah, about the idea of lifelong learning, which I mentioned earlier, that education is more than just going to school, that in this age of artificial intelligence and social media, we have to keep learning and relearning. And when I mentioned to them, I thought they would be very welcome. They all rejected it outright. They said, no, the last thing anyone wants to do is go back to school. The notion of a lifelong learning to many people is abhorrent. I don't have an answer for this, but I would love to hear Ernie's take on how his solution would address not only the need, but also that sort of, it sounds like a reluctance, people of my age group to change with the times. I think that's what I've got. I think I'm done. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, David. Let me reflect before you respond, Ernie, okay?
Good.
Okay. So David got started, and he has an interesting background in Russian literature, and then went to UC Santa Cruz that at the time had a different model that wasn't as tied to the transcript grade system as we talked about in Ernie's presentation, because it was a pass-fail system. And it required a lot of interaction. Okay, Ernie?
Yeah, so actually, I think that we didn't want you to recap his response. What we were planning to do is that I would answer his questions, and then he would come up with a counter proposal, and then you would summarize that.
Okay. So yeah, basically what I was going to do is reflect his questions, but if you're
So you just ask the question, yeah.
If you've taken adequate notes, then that's fine. Then I don't need to do that.
Right. Yeah, I think at this phase, the goal is that you pick which question for me to answer first.
Okay. So let me rerun this. Okay. Thank you, David, for the stimulating questions for Ernie. And I will just go down the list and cherry pick and rephrase what I think your question is. If I didn't rephrase your question right, David, please correct the question so that Ernie is responding to your true question. So one of the interesting points that David brought up was how this broken system ends up with 88% of the people in prison without a high school degree. And that this system of education that has evolved from medieval times that Ernie, that you described, has failed them. So I would be interested in having you elaborate on this comment of David's about how your thoughts would correct this.
Okay, sure. So the best way to think about this, as someone said, is that humans are Machiavellian status-seeking primates. In that we're primarily driven, unless in moments of extreme emergency, we're really focused on status, on face, esteem, and things like that. And and we're also smart enough that if we can cheat and get status without paying the price, we will. And I think that's pretty universal among our species. So if you start from that premise, then people who are in prison are doing things largely because of the status game that they are playing. And from that perspective, education is a really horrible status game, especially for people from certain backgrounds. It's socially unpopular to try and succeed. Even if you do succeed, it's unclear it's going to pay off for you in the long run. And so they end up doing, risky behavior that require resources to gain status, or for the sake of status itself in gangs and things like that. And so the short answer is that we need to unleash innovators who can make learning more exciting than committing crime. And that's a tall order, but right now, this one change doesn't solve those problems. What this change does, it allows the people who are solving those problems to be rewarded for it. So right now, if a teacher does something really engaging and exciting to students to get them to stay off the streets and be better citizens, they get 0 college credit for that. Right? It never shows up on their transcript. And they have to do this on the edges and the sides. And the goal is that transfer does 2 things. One, it gets rid of grades, but the second thing is it gets rid of academic disciplines as the taxonomy for or understanding early childhood education. Like, why are we studying English and math and social? Because there are professors of these things who've written textbooks on this, right? These professors don't write textbooks on how to survive on the streets, and therefore we don't test people on that. But why can't a school say, our school is going to major and teach people life skills to escape the ghetto, to survive and escape the ghetto? And if they did that, they can define mastery. And the idea of mastery is that you have consistent quality, but not consistent content. And so, and you know exactly what this level of mastery is. And this gets to the other questions that David mentioned, so I may as well rant on that for a bit as well, and then we can figure out where to go from here, is that what we're trying to do is create an open platform. So it's not like there's a mastery.org repository that everyone has to put their data into. No, this is a schema-like format. This is like the web, right? The mastery is coming up with the HTML and the HTTP of credentialing. And every organization will publish stuff that looks like a web page, and anyone can read it like a web page, but they can host it with whatever technology and whatever, because it's designed to be consumed by humans, primarily, but managed by computers. And so you can put video, you can put 3D models, you can put virtual reality, whatever you want in these things, and there can be hopefully multiple independent providers as well as open source projects that you can host yourself, like a blog. And that all these systems are available. And the whole point is that the hope, the dream, is that teachers will then be empowered to help students chart their own journey at their own pace. And if a kid wants to take a year to understand Russian literature in 7th grade because he's just obsessed with it, and they say, okay, let's figure out the things that you're going to master. And you can master existing off-the-shelf masteries in language and in culture and in political science and things like that. And then you can create your own custom masteries around, the parenting style of the Tsars of Russia and how that compares to modern parenting, right? Is that you define the criteria and people can look at that and see, how long it took you, how much effort you put into that. So, David's papers that he, pours over now, rather than being his little private thing, could be part of his portfolio. That people would say like, wow, this guy knows how to take feedback really well and iterate on it. And the hope is also that once we start putting rich data into the system, we can then start training computers to assist us, right? Just like radiologists can have computers pre-scan things to identify what's interesting and uninteresting, over time, things, right now we can do this for math and we can do it for programming. We'll be able to do that for the humanities. Again, not perfectly, but enough to do a lot of the grunt work so the teachers can focus on the human value add of that piece.
Okay, so let me pick up on another one of David's questions. But David, do you have?
I wanted to make sure David felt like his question was answered.
Well, yeah. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But it leads to an. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I
also wanted to do a format check. So we're about 30 minutes into it now, and so the original plan was that we would switch, and then David would make a proposal, and I would question him. But if we're on a roll, maybe let's just try organically to see where this format goes, as long as you and David have questions you think are worth exploring, and then we'll figure out how to wrap it up later.
Yeah, I think it would be a shame to stop now because we've only looked at one question, and I think there's more. And Ernie, you really haven't had a chance to respond to any more than one question, so it would be cutting things very short to change now.
Okay, so the follow-on question that came from David that I feel is appropriate to bring up now is, how do you take this to scale? Okay, I think we get the point that if you have an inspired teacher here and there who can really rise to the occasion, and to use Ernie's example, teach skills that allow people to get out of the ghetto, that's an inspired teacher. How do you take that to scale?
All right, so actually, this is interesting. This is really about the technology adoption curve of how we get from nobody doing this to everybody doing it, right? And so I think the interesting thing about this system is that this is not a classic low-end disruption where you start with the people in the ghettos who are not being well served and you build something around them. That's not the way it's happening this time around for various reasons. The way this is happening this time around is what's called sometimes high-end disruption or obsolescence. And the classic example of this was the iPhone. The iPhone was not cheaper than a regular phone, it was more expensive. But it did so much more that high-status people adopted it, and it became a high-margin business that was so compelling it killed the low end of the phone market, effectively. So I believe that's the model for this, is that right now you have high-end prep schools where the teachers really have the resources and the time to invest in their students, and they can't because they're gridlocked by the academic transcript. So these people are going to start and create a system which allows their rich preppy kids to express their individuality and their learning and do stuff. So which means there's a lot of money behind it, there's a lot of technology behind it, and the people are going to build out all these tools. So and these people have the resources to do all these things. They'll build they will be paying the early adopter price of doing a high-touch, high-cost solution to personalized education for those students. But because of that, they're highly motivated and they know it's more than likely to succeed. Okay? So once it succeeds at the high end, these early adopters, this cluster of schools in New England, if they get that and they get colleges to adopt it, then they break the college monopoly. And so it becomes legitimate. And then you can start seeing other private schools across the board adopting it, and you'll start seeing a few states like New Hampshire and places like that, Maine, that will take the idea. They'll start adopting it there. And so it's actually going to trickle in from the top down. I know it's a horrible phrase, trickle down, but that's how you build up the expensive, painful infrastructure. And as you do that, then each tranche going from early adopters, from the innovators to the early adopters, to the middle adopters, to late adopters, entrepreneur, because it's an ecosystem, right? This is not like a product owned by Microsoft or the government of Tennessee. This is an ecosystem of standards. Once you have the standards in place, different for-profit companies, state governments, nonprofits, individual hackers will take this and say, I can make this work for my community and use case by adapting and tweaking it this way or re-implementing it on top of this environment. So it's a slow cultural diffusion process that will happen. And my premise is that at different stages along that adoption curve, there's different roadblocks that you'll hit. But as long as the fundamental value proposition is high, which again, it's going to probably start creeping up along the rich and the powerful and the elite schools, and then it'll probably start, people will be doing things along the bottom end, right, where you can see a charter school turnaround in an underprivileged neighborhood, saying, hey, let's take a stab at this and use these things. And you already have no excuses schools that are trying to do more creative things like that. I could see one of those where they really try to address the holistic needs of a child, someone there in the next, maybe not for another 5 or 10 years, but at some point saying, we're going to turn our school, our district, into a mastery-based school rather than a transcript school. And it's hard, but there's data points where people have been able to pull that off with strong communities. So the biggest challenge is, frankly, parental fear. Is that parents are just terrified that if you don't give them grades, that they're not going to learn anything and they'll never get into college and they'll never escape here. And even if it's an unrealistic hope the way it is now, to take it away from people is very traumatizing. And so it's only after you've seen the elites actually succeed at this will you find the underclass actually feeling safe enough to take a bet on it.
Okay, so I would love to hear David's response to his question about taking these concepts to scale that we just heard from Ernie.
Yeah, that helps, Ernie. Explain some things. I can see you're using kind of an open source model like a GitHub, which I think is a great idea. I think the idea of taking my paper and making it available to others is useful. I wish I had resources like that I could have relied on when I was in college. One of the questions I had, though, again, back to the 6 C's that I talked about: collaboration, communication, critical thinking. I want to hear from you. I have my own thoughts, but how this system would assist in those skills, because I think those are important, and I know you agree. How would that assist?
Right, so I think there's 2 pieces of it. One is that it would validate them. Because right now, if you're not one of the 6 academic disciplines, you may as well not exist, right? And so I think that we can create a much more humanistic, and different groups could propose their own mastery criteria that different groups could adopt, just like people voluntarily adopt different JavaScript libraries, for their website. They say, our district is going to adopt the 6C curriculum as our core masteries that we require. And every high school would say, we require these core masteries. And I think that, my list of agency, curiosity, empathy, and stamina. But there's others is that you could say, this is our core curriculum. We don't really care if people know how to do long division, if they know how to hear another human being's pain and respond well. And they can actually get away with it, which is literally impossible and illegal in most states to say that. And, I've gotten lynched for saying similar things, or at least been threatened by lynching. So it is, you're creating a cultural shift where you're breaking the tyranny of these narrow academic disciplines. The other thing that's interesting, you talk about posting papers online. People are terrified of that because of plagiarism. Why? Because all that matters is getting the grade. If you can copy an A paper and submit it and get the grade, why not, right? Because that's the way the game is played. But the point is that, like you said, and I think Acton Academy does a great job, like, we just want you to write something, it doesn't matter what, and then we have a conversation about it. Because the first draft is, as you probably know, is almost irrelevant. What matters is what you do with the editorial feedback. And so if you say, okay, we don't really care about where you get the work from, that's just table stakes. Term papers like, information is free. What matters is the dialogue about how you improve stuff. And when you get to the point, then, one of the reasons they say 1950s America, the most important thing was to do work on yourself, because in large businesses, they would have, a team of accountants who would all do their work independently and then cross-check them, because you didn't have computers to make sure that the arithmetic was done correctly. And so not copying and non-collaboration was a core value of mid-century American education. If you take away that and say, okay, what do we care about? We care about working teams, and then you come up with, like we're going to do truthful. Okay, we're not worried about, was this idea Ernie's idea or David's idea? No, it's a good idea. And then at the end, maybe Chris will say, okay, this was maybe 60% Ernie and 40% David, because that was the way that, this bowl was structured. And that's not a dig against David, that's just, that's the amount of work he put in, and therefore he gets that amount of credit. And then you rate the team on it. And so this person in these teams, and you say, okay, he was in this role in this team, and you can see how they, and then teams that are fuzzy like that don't fit well in a transcript. But in a computerized system, they're golden, right? Because you can check all the teams that they were in, how those teams performed, how they were rated. You can do 360 feedback of, like we do in businesses, of what people on the team thought about you. And in fact, to your other point, like, this is how work should be done anyway in the real world, right? Is you have people working teams on projects that they care about, that they think matter, or someone tells them they matter and they believe that person. And, right, that's the other fascinating thing about this. I really see this as the next LinkedIn, right? And this is, I think Microsoft may even be on the Master.org consortium. I don't know. They're on all sorts of consortiums these days. But you can easily imagine people, taking business tools into schools and then taking these school-based assessment tools into the workplace, right? Because it's the goal, and to your other point about like lifelong learning for most people means lifelong schooling, which other than the academic class is a fate worse than death, right? And so, but like my son, he hates school. I mean, he doesn't mind being at school. He just doesn't think he learns anything there. But he loves learning. He'll watch YouTube videos all day long, learning how to do magic tricks or weird math formulas and things like that. And it's like education has mostly abandoned learning as a goal, and so learning may have to largely abandon education as a vehicle, right? Is that the goal is to like help people learn stuff that either intrinsically or intrinsically matters to them for whatever reason. They sometimes call it deep learning. And you can do deep learning, like if you're really passionate about getting an international baccalaureate, you can do deep learning on conjugating grammars and things like that because you're excited about the goal. Okay, if that's the thing you really want, go for it. But if it's not the thing you want, we're not going to force you into that box. And I think when people rediscover how much fun learning is, and can be when you do it socially about things you care about, then the problem is that lifelong learning is like a thing that is being marketed to them as a tool, right? Whereas there's lots of things that people do for fun that matter to them, that help them along, which we have no infrastructure around, right? I often felt like I'm getting several pages.
Okay, so yeah, let's take a break there. That was a long run by Ernie.
Yeah, sorry.
I would love David feedback more than just bullet points of what Ernie said.
Yeah, actually, I do have a response. I love these ideas. Again, it's consistent with my education, and I was very disappointed to see UC Santa Cruz abandon the pass-fail system. I know why they did it, because students wanted to get into graduate school, but I don't think that was the right change of direction. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. I'm thinking of a young kid, boy or girl, growing up in a poor background, and not only in the inner city, it could be in a rural area. Could be a young white child growing up in farm country, or it could be a Hispanic kid growing up in Watsonville, or a black child growing up in their city. What do they love? They love things like music. And you said something that really resonated with me, Ernie. You said whatever intrinsically matters to them for whatever reason. I've known a lot of. I've actually done tutoring in some very impoverished areas, and it's hard to inspire children in those areas to read books, because you go into their homes and there are no books. And if you're lucky, there's a television, and you marvel at how people communicate. But one of the things that in any community you find is music. You find music, and you find kids telling stories, and these are things that can be the basis for an education. I mean, one of the leading venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, Ben Horowitz, is a big fan of hip hop music, and he's always quoting hip hop, and some of it's crazy stuff. I mean, if it works for a billionaire, why shouldn't some 10-year-old kid be free to explore the music that he or she loves, and then use that as a basis for education? So I'm this is my proposal. What I want to hear from you is am I talking crazy, or is this something you could actually work with your system?
Yeah, I mean, the point is that, like I said, the goal is standardizing on the format and measures of quality, not on the content, right? So in order for this to work, right, he has to be part of a learning community of some kind, right? It doesn't have to be a school, but it has to be a community that is willing to curate these portfolios, right? And say, okay, these are the things that our learners, like I'm even trying to get away from the whole idea of students and professors and all this sort of stuff because it's starting to drive me bonkers, is that you have a community of learners and you have the administrators, the sysadmins, right, who manage the system, and you have, I don't want to call it counselors because that's not but you have guides. And the guide comes up to the learner and says, hey, we would, in order to join this community, we have certain criteria that you have to do, certain basic skills we want to make sure you master. But other than that, we really want you to find your path forward. And so when the person, and this idea of enrollment is they're enrolling on a journey. And you say, okay, and you try to, and then, the more skillful the guide, the wider range of quality they can handle in a learner, right? So if you have a really skillful guy, they can draw out from this person the thing. And so, like, if someone wants to, quote unquote, major in hip hop, it's like, okay, tell me about your favorite artist. Okay, tell me about your favorite song. Okay, let's break down that song. Right? And you can, and then you have to figure out what modalities work for them, right? Do they write a paper? Do they write their own song? Do they sing something? Do they just share a personal narrative on video? Do they go on the street and interview people who listen to this music? Do they just throw a dance party? And, organize it and manage the budget and the venue and, the legal issues and things like that, right? The point is that to do things to matter them, that, what's it is that there's I guess back to that multidimensional meritocracy and sort of cross-cutting status games. So yeah, the further it is from the mainstream where this is pioneered, the more work it is, right? So doing things that are similar to an elite private school will be easy. Doing things further down the road will be harder. But the mantra of the web, right? Simple things should be easy, difficult things should be possible.
So,
and maybe I'll leave it on that, yeah.
Yeah, so since we don't have an otherwise gallery to ask questions, let me just pop in with something that I'm interested in, and both of you can respond to this. Alternative educational systems have been implemented, and I'm thinking of Waldorf and Montessori, that are guided by the interest of the students, the participants. And we know several tech billionaires have gone through that system where they get to learn at their own pace. There's still requirements to cover the gamut of the basic subjects that are popular in schools today. But I'm just wondering what you both think about that. And Ernie knows that my son's been involved. Is a pretty gifted Montessori teacher in Australia. So go ahead.
David, did you want to?
Yeah, that relates back to my point about scalability, because I was thinking back in my mind is this has been done before, and it's been tried, it's been successful. A lot of people, like Chris said, have gone through this type of program. But I suppose what's different is that it was never implemented at a large scale. It was never institutionalized. And I think what you're suggesting is something, for example, if you went to Montessori school, how would other students see your work, right? They'd have to go to the same school. You couldn't even go to the Montessori school across town. And so there's a way of sharing the work of the students that I think adds a new dimension to this. And I think that contributes to the scalability. But again, what I'm really getting at is that this doesn't reduce the need for teachers. In fact, in some ways, it increases the need for teacher attention and personalization, which I think is wonderful. But I also think it's a scale problem. I think that it's going to take a lot more of an infrastructure to support. At least that's my impression, is that there'll be need for more teachers and more training. I think it's a good investment, but if you were to bring it to not even a school board, but a PTA meeting, they would and instead of, let's say they embrace the idea, how is this, how are we going to fund this, how we're going to how do we get this? I mean, you've already explained, you start with the high-end schools, the private schools which have the money can build the infrastructure. I think that's a really important point, and I think it's a good model. How do you go from there to broader education? How, I mean, and no one has the answer clearly, but how do you envision that spreading to the the wider community?
Right. I think there's a couple pieces there I think that are worth talking about. I think you're really right, because like the Montessori model, it broke down because you couldn't transmit the work up or across, right? The lack of the equivalent of a transcript. So this would create like the equivalent of a transcript. There'd be a Montessori mastery, portfolio, which would be a standard that they could publish and use to integrate into the system. So that would solve one set of problems with that. But the other is it's very resource intensive. I think the short version is that we've got to get away from this idea of a teacher. Right, the person who knows all the answers is trying to inculcate that into students, right? So if you start thinking in terms of guides, then you realize that, one guide can carry a lot of people if they all follow each other, right? Moses could lead the children of Israel, however many that was, as long as everyone's following him, and they know where they're going, and then they know what to do, and they can resolve disputes among them. So I think that. The way you solve that problem is well, right now there's a gazillion amounts of, like in California, I think we spend more money on administration than we do on teachers because of all the policies and stuff like that, right? So one could imagine a much more lighter weight alternative in a bunch of different ways. Secondly, I think that, there's lots of far-reaching stuff, like do we get rid of the whole idea of school? I mean, my idea is that schools and co-working spaces will kind of merge, and you have families kind of learning and working together in a seamless whole, right? Because why is it when I want to learn something, I have to go to a school, or I just go on the internet and learn something, or my kids take a class. It's like, this is bizarre, right? You learn stuff you need to learn when you need to learn it, and you move between producing work and learning how to produce work more or less seamlessly. So you can imagine much more lighter weight integrated models. But in the short term, one is that we already know how to automate a lot of the rote work around math and science, right? And so the hope is that artificial intelligence will help us start automating a lot of the rote work around language and doing it. So the other thing is that right now we have a standardized scale for paying teachers. If you are the best sixth grade teacher in the world, you will be paid at most twice what an average teacher would be paid. Yeah. If you're the best programmer in the world, you'd be paid 100 times what an average programmer is paid, right? Because there is no return of scale, there's no return on quality, right? So you can imagine that if we actually have this digital learning ecosystem of mastery and techniques and learning, that you will have rock star videos, which if you want to sit and listen to someone talk, you listen to the best person in the world talk, right? That's kind of a no-brainer. But that also you could schedule, 1 hour with the guy who's brilliant at talking to rural white kids who are interested in music and figuring out what they want, right? So you get the right expertise at the right point in time, was incredibly valuable. And then you have someone who's sweet and caring, but not an expert, who can hang out with them the rest of the day and keep their hands held and make them feel warm and loved, right? Who doesn't have to be a person who's gone through and has, $50,000 of student debt from going to teachers college that they have to pay off, right? And that could be the high schooler, right? Who's getting paid for doing this. Or is that right now we have this weird system where we've got the administrative staff, and you've got teachers, and then you've got some aides, and then everyone else is supposed to be passive, right? It's like, there are a lot of, like the kids in their spare time, they go and babysit because they like hanging out with small kids. Like, why don't they do that during the school day? And they get assessed on it. They get mastery on conflict resolution. My God, I wish I had learned conflict resolution of small children when I was in high school rather than learning it on the job as a 50-year-old adult, right? Like, why not?
Yeah,
like, if there was someone who actually knew this stuff, who could say, like, look, and when you're a kid, it's a lot easier to say, like, let's let's practice on kids in a real world setting, you know, with some adult supervision and learn this stuff. Right? There's so many things you could do if you break up the idea that it has to be a teacher helping a student.
Okay, I'm just looking at the time here. I think we're kind of running out. And there are lots of great questions that could be picked up for future.
Let me suggest this then. How about David summarizes first, like what he's learned and the key insights he's gained, and where, you know, what would be things that either he wants to learn next or he'd love to see the next step in developing an idea, and then I can respond to that and we'll wrap it up there.
Okay.
And
you ready to do that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed this. In fact, it's very heartening because this is, and the point I was trying to make is this is something that was very important to me when I was young, when I was a teenager, and I did a lot of teaching when I was even in high school and in junior college. I was very engaged in teaching because for me the whole educational process. By the way, I went to one of the best high schools in the country, Homestead High School in Cupertino. I mean, Steve Wozniak was a classmate. I mean, it was not, you know, it was an extraordinary, and I wouldn't even get into the funding from NASA. We had all the money in the world. We had our own TV studio. We had all the resources we wanted. It didn't help me because I wasn't learning the way I wanted to learn. And so the college education I got was extraordinary. And I've been frustrated my whole life trying to find a way to share that with people. And the system has always been in the way. So this gives me enormous encouragement because I think this is the way education should be. And I think this is the direction we need to go in. So I would love to participate in this in some way and help define it and help move it forward. I love the open source model. One of the things that you were talking about, Ernie, that I wanted to toss in is that I love the idea of children teaching other children because that's how they learn anyway. You know, the fact is kids learn from their peers more than they do from anyone else. And so when a kid is 2 weeks ahead in class, they can teach the children 2 weeks behind them. So I think this is an organic structure. I think it's more natural to who we are as, what did you call us? Some kind of primates? I mean, it really is much more.
Machiavellian status-seeking primates.
Yeah. MSSPs. And we have even have a new acronym. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a huge opportunity. I think it would be a great challenge, but I think people are starving for a solution. And I think we are on the cusp of a turning point in education. I think so many things are going wrong that people are open to ideas. I heard that in the presidential debate of all things. So I'm in favor of it, and I'm inspired by it.
Okay, Ernie.
Yeah, so I feel like I've been talking a lot, and I should just probably be more quiet, but I think I'll say what I have to say for the debrief. I can't think of anything else to say.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for viewing this.
Any last words or reflections, Chris? You get the last word before I sign us off.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of really interesting ideas, and as moderator, I needed a way to break them down. So Ernie gets in a roll, and he goes from one idea to another idea to another idea, and I think I, as moderator, should be able to just jump in and say, oh, let's stay with that for a minute, and let's bounce that one around, and then go on to the next one.
Sounds good, yeah.
So that is sort of transitioning into the debrief, I suppose.
Yeah. But so that was on the format. Anything on the content that you wanted to, any words you wanted to put in before the end, or should we just go into the debrief?
Yeah, as far as the content, I understand the idealism, and I understand the model of the top-down, of start with the elites, let them hone this, and then it'll trickle down. I'm not sure if that's a practical solution because they're so invested in the transcript model. What would cause them to want to break out of that is
Sorry, who's that?
the elites and the elite institutions that you're charging with the job of creating this new system, and I'm just not seeing why they're incentivized to do such a thing.
Well, let's go back. I'd like to address that question because that's a really interesting one. And to make sure I'm clearing that point there, is that I want to talk about the elite private high schools, the prep schools.
Okay.
And so the prep schools actually have leverage over the elite universities.
Okay.
So that's the point, is that they're frustrated.
So, okay, I get that then. So I was thinking you were talking university level when you were talking.
It's really, yes. And really, I think that, you know how college has become the new high school. I imagine a world where high school is the new college.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That really your last 4 years of living at home are really where you figure out who you are and what you're doing. And that what we think of as college becomes more like graduate school.
Okay. So that was my one content observation that I'll throw out there. But yeah, so with that, let's just transition into debrief. Is that
right.
Okay? So what went well, what didn't go so well, and what would you do different next time?
Yeah, I think the first lesson is, first of all, we blew out our format, but I think that was fine. Secondly, I think I need like a 3-minute timer for every question so that I don't ramble on.
Right.
Right. I think having bite-sized chunks. I mean, I think we need a visual timer, frankly. There's got to be some Zoom app that'll do that because we just have no concept of time when we're talking, and I'm horrible at rambling. So I'll stop.
Okay. Oh, you got a dog with you there, Ernie?
And this is Wednesday at work on Fridays.
Oh, that's our dog is similar looking, light colored. What kind of dog is that?
English Cocker Spaniel.
Beautiful. Okay, David, as far as your feedback, high, low. Well,
I thought Ernie gave a great presentation. He's obviously given us a lot of thought. I thought it was, sometimes he moved too quickly. Like you said, went too many ideas. I was missing labels. I would have been easier to refer to X, Y, and Z. I mean, I was kind of calling it the thing or the idea. So having some labels, maybe you mentioned them, but I didn't catch them. Just having something to refer to them would be helpful. But that's just, that's a minor tweak. And I think the challenge for this topic is to try to know whether to stay at 30,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 500 feet, or 6 feet off the ground, because I think we kind of went up and down a lot, which is not bad, but it's for a discussion like this, it can be difficult when somebody's at 30,000 feet and someone else is at 500 feet. I've noticed this in previous discussion. When you're at different levels of granularity or specificity or concept versus implementation, trying to keep it focused on either we're talking concept today, or for this session or for this 5 minutes, and now we're going to go to implementation for the next 5 minutes. Somehow keeping those separate would be very helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's doable, but does that make sense?
No, total sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing that we did in an earlier version of this, I don't think Chris was around for that one, is we created a very concrete scenario. Like you were a member of a faculty committee trying to make a decision.
Yes.
And having a concrete context would be interesting. Now, the interesting thing about this, once I'm starting to let go of the idea of winners and losers, right? This definitely felt much more organic, right?
Yes. Yes.
So, like, let's say beta 3. So what if we said at the beginning, okay, I'm going to be pitching. I will create an outline of my 5 key points and the key terms that I'm talking about, and that maybe I'll give it to an event. I provide that to David and the audience right before I speak, so he sees them and he has kind of a structure of it. Secondly, that we create an explicit framing context, so that we know that, like, okay, this is, we pretend we're in this scenario where we have these roles, and this is what we're trying to accomplish. So we say, okay, Ernie is going to get ready to pitch his local high school on private high school, that they should formally join the Master.org consortium, right? So that's the pitch I'm going to make, and that this is a practice for that. And then David is my coach, who's going to like basically pick holes in what I'm saying and help me understand it better. So a framing context like that.
Well, yeah, so there were a couple big ideas there that emerged from both of you. One is David's labeling idea, and the other is Ernie framing it differently. What popped into my mind is a possibility of can we use PowerPoints or some equivalent technology?
Yeah.
Because that would give you the labels. See, that gives you something concrete to hang your words on.
Yeah, but then my problem is that, yeah, it becomes a different thing when people are talking with PowerPoints.
Yeah.
I think once you start having slides up there, quality control goes out the window because it's so hard to do good PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
The one way that I have seen it done is you're only allowed one word per slide.
No, that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's really that. Yeah. I mean, they do that at TED Talks.
You can have images and diagrams, but only one word per slide.
Yeah, no, nice, and that answers David's, I think, very legitimate. Because David's concerned there about having a word or a context or label you can respond to a specific word that way. That would help me too.
Yeah, they do that at TED Talks. They will give the very minimum, but having a minimal a visual aid would make a big difference, especially when you're talking about a new concept that you haven't heard before and you're not quite sure when you first hear it. You know, one of the things we've talked about before is with presentations, you say what you're going to say, then you say it, and then you say what you've said, and that's part of the reason you do that is to reinforce it so the person leaves with a clear recollection of what it was, and then you have sort of, it's almost like keyframes when you're in video. You remember a key frame, which is sort of your association with what the whole thing was about.
There's a format, I don't know what its name is, but where you actually have 10 slides in 10 minutes, and the slides are on autoplay.
Cool.
So they act as the timer for that.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, and I would certainly push for more organization. I think we also talked about having a time limit on so say we did that as a framing thing. We frame it, and then we have the 10 slides, 10 slides with 10 words. And maybe you got some total budget 10 words. You can steal a few here and there, but that's a really interesting constraint. And then I have a 10-minute intro. Yep. And then, one question I had was, David, did you find, so what you did, Chris, I thought more as a recap than just a summary.
Well, no, that's what I was going for. I was trying to do a recap. Yeah.
So how useful was that for you, David?
Useful in a couple of ways. Let me see. He gave me a couple of bullet points that reminded me of what you had talked about. It's the same idea. Tell me what you're going to tell me, then tell me, and then tell me what you told me. It gave me time to sort of make my list. So Chris's summary, I have 4 points. He said, how to fix education. Now it's effective only for certain groups. The smartest were set up to get the top jobs. We want a multi-dimensional meritocracy. So this sort of gave me talking points. I think that was the advantage of Chris's summary, is it gave me my talking points. I mean, I had heard everything you said, but it was hard to keep my own list. I was trying to do two things at once, write down what you were saying and then make my list of questions. So Chris kind of provided me with the talking points to form my questions.
Okay, that's good. I guess I already knew what I'd say, so it felt a bit repetitive, but I can see how saying it slower and more clearly would have been a big advantage for other listeners.
Well,
so that's good.
Because your presentation was ad lib, and you didn't say my first point and my second point and my third point. We had to sort of reassemble the structure after the fact. I mean, that's why a structure or a bullet point, that's why a slide can be helpful.
I think that's really,
Yeah, David's constant. Both those responses from David are internally consistent.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, the dog is getting ready to leave. All right, any other, so we do the slides, and then I think, like, the way this worked, I thought was actually really nice, probably because David's main job was really to create a list of questions.
Yeah.
And then we didn't have anybody else to intersperse. So I think if he had asked, just going through his questions, and then having a tighter time limit, so I focus on just answering the narrow question once.
Right.
We need more. We do need a domaganto, a question tamer, possibly even as a separate.
Right. Yeah. So I let it flow today, and that's part of the experimentation, and so I think it flowed too freely and widely ranging.
Yeah.
And we need to focus it. And so we should let you get going with your dog, Ernie.
Yeah. Let me ask guys one last quick question. This is quick. I tried to personalize my responses. I brought in my term paper and stuff. Does personalizing the discussion, does that help or does that get in the way?
I liked it. I liked it a lot.
I really liked it. I mean, when you said, like the idea I can put my term papers online, I would love that.
Yeah.
That was like a huge validation of the idea. It may have felt a touch forced, I think, the second time you brought it up, but overall I thought it was really good. I was thinking that, like, it would be good to have had, maybe before I share, David introduces himself just to give some background about himself, so everyone on the call knows who he is, and then I introduce myself and start talking.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah.
Framing point. Last thing, are you guys able to talk next Tuesday to figure out next steps?
Let me see. Next Friday, I'm not available. I'll be out of town.
Tuesday.
But I'll look at Tuesday here. Yes, I'm available Tuesday at 6 my time. That'd be 5 your time.
Yep. David?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, I'm available.
Okay, great. So we can wrap it up now and ponder what next up. I think, Chris, can you think of a topic that you'd be willing to pitch?
Well, I have to think about it. Getting political, I would love to know how to break this Republican-Democrat problem or just stalemate we have in this country. And that's a huge topic, and I don't know the answer, but I would love to hear it.
Can you frame the problem?
The problem is the people in this country represent people who go to their various governmental bodies, let's say the U.S. Congress, and what the congressmen do is they get wrapped into the system of having to adhere rigidly to their party line, and therefore things get locked in Washington and Congress, and they don't get done. And the idea of free-thinking representatives is sort of going out the window, because they go in there and they become representative of not their constituents, but of their party and their party boss, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell or whatever. So that is there. That's what I thought.
Right. I mean, okay, but in terms of something that a solution like, would you like to pitch, for example, replacing portions of our legal system with mediation?
I could do something like that, sure. Alternative dispute resolution, that's what I do. So sure, that'd be pretty.
Right. Could you make that a framing, come up with a framing like, if you had the ear of the next president, you find out who's going to be elected president, or a candidate who'd like to be president, and you had 10 minutes to pitch them on, this is how you should change the legal system to embrace an alternative dispute resolution. Would that be something that you could get behind?
Well, I could get behind it. I'd have to give it some thought.
I'm not saying do, but yeah, something. If that's part. Anyway, that's fodder for our Tuesday conversation. Think about
Okay,
next.
let's do that. And then we should probably get going. There's a thunderstorm coming in, and my dogs need to walk too.
Oh my
All
God.
right, guys.
All right.
This is good. I enjoyed it.
Okay,
Thanks,
Thanks a
guys.
lot. It was great.
Okay, bye.